Journey, your television passport to the exciting, colorful world of adventure.
Ladies and gentlemen, on our program series, we've had the pleasure of presenting what we sincerely believe have been some truly outstanding underwater films. But it has remained for a modest, soft-spoken schoolteacher from Newport Beach, California, to capture on film some of the loveliest, strangest, even most humorous glimpses of King Neptune's domain. He is Mr. Norman Wakeman, and it's my pleasure to welcome him now with what we feel is the most beautiful underwater film we have ever seen. Mr. Wakeman, how are you, sir?
Fine, thank you, Jack.
Welcome to our program series, and what brings you here to Marine Land?
So far as we know, Marine Land is the only place where they have a live whale in captivity. And it's a real chance to study a live whale and photograph him. Here she is out here. Her name is Bubbles.
Well, now, we're going to see whales in your film also. What type would they be?
Bubbles is a toothed whale, and the ones that you will see will be the California grays, which are toothless whales, baleen whales as they are called.
Well, now, Bubbles here seems to be quite small. As a matter of fact, for a few moments, I thought perhaps it was an overgrown porpoise. Just how big would Bubbles be?
Bubbles is about 16 feet now. Bubbles is a blackfish, which is a species of whale, and Bubbles will grow to be about 20 feet.
Now, Mr. Wakeman, let's talk about you. We mentioned a moment ago that you're a school teacher. Where and what do you teach, sir?
I teach at Pasadena City College, and I teach biology.
Now, just how big is this world between the tides that you're going to present for us?
Well, Jack, since we are creatures of the land, we think of the continents as being more important than the sea. There's North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa. Put them all together, and the continents cover less than 1/3 of the world. The ocean covers more than 2/3 of the surface of the earth. And all along the edge of the sea is the tide land. When the tide is out, it is a part of the land. But when the tide comes in, it becomes a part of the sea. And because it is an ever-changing world, it is a world in itself. It is called the world between the tides. Deception Pass on Puget Sound in Washington. The tides rise and fall 16 feet, twice each day. The boat is barely able to hold its own against this 10-mile-an-hour tide. The force that causes the mighty ocean to move first one way and then the other is the force of the moon and the sun. And because the moon is 4 times closer to the earth than the sun, the moon causes most of the tide. All along the shores, lighthouses warn of the dangers of the world between the tides. This is a heartbreaking scene to any boat lover. It was caused by a fog, and the boat unavoidably came into the tide line. The total loss, in spite of the extensive salvage operations. So must the whales stay away from the shore. The gray whale, 60 feet long, flukes 20 feet wide, has come all the way from the Bering Sea to Scammon Lagoon in Lower California, where they will have their young and mate. Occasionally, Jack, one does come ashore. They seldom survive. They may be dashed to pieces by the waves or crushed by their own weight. The rocks along the shore serve as a place for sea lions to rest when the tide is out. But when the tide comes in, they must leave. They are free to come and go as they choose. They do not have to take the force of the crashing breakers, but the youngsters will wait until the last minute. The very last minute. But the waves present a problem to the thousands of animals that live on the wave-swept rocky shore. The barnacles and mussels are the most numerous, and they are cemented with threads to the rocks, and here they must remain. The barnacle stands on his head and kicks food into his mouth with his feet. He has a dozen or so of feathery legs, and he continuously rakes the seawater. But when the tide goes out, the barnacles must close up. They now have the problem of dryness. But the time of low tide is a time of great activity for the thousands of animals that live in the tide pools, the puddles of seawater left by the receding tide. The sea anemone is an animal that is named after a flower. Instead of petals, it has tentacles with sting cells. The jellyfish is an upside-down sea anemone. The tentacles are hanging down, but it has exactly the same means of obtaining food as the sea anemone. It catches its prey with the tentacles, stings them, and causes the food to be brought into the mouth in the center of the umbrella-like structure. The jellyfish is nature's first attempt at an animal with more than one cell, and they've been on this earth for nearly 500 million years. You can see right through them, and because you can't see any working parts, you wonder what makes them move. It is typical of primitive forms of life to regenerate or produce a new structure when it is lost. The starfish has lost 2 arms and is growing 2 new ones. If the arms are given a chance, the arms will grow a new starfish. The white structure at the center of the arms is a sieve or device for purifying the seawater. Instead of having blood in their veins, starfish have salt water in their veins. And then the seawater is pumped in and out of structures called tube feet. This is a hydraulic system which is identical to the one that hoists your car into the air in a gasoline station. The tube feet are accordion pleated, and when the pressure is increased, they are extended. And the suction cups will attach to a rock, and then as the pressure is decreased, the tube feet are withdrawn. And so this starfish is prowling the floor of a tide pool looking for something to eat. And he's done quite well according to our standards. He's eating cracked crab, although he doesn't have to crack it. It has digestive enzymes that will do the job for it. But what good would suction cups on tube feet do a star that lives in the sand? And to show you how nature has provided for the needs of this animal, it has learned to use the arms with a writhing serpent-like motion, just like the sidewinder, who also lives where it's sandy. The sea urchin is a relative of the starfish, scientists have decided. It has long extended spines, and they're the tube feet, just exactly like the starfish in structure and the way they act. And here are the suction cups. Scientists believe that a sea urchin is a starfish whose arms have been joined together to form a ball. And the spines have been developed for protective reasons. There are many snails in the sea, and they spend their lives eating algae or seaweeds. If you put the camera lens about 2 inches away from the mouth of a snail, it looks like this. And you can see the teeth. And a dentist would say that a snail has very good occlusion. The snails that didn't have good occlusion have not survived. So you can see why you better keep the snails out of the garden. Here's a snail with neon lights. Most snails have shells. Because these have no shell, the gills are exposed. And the gills, for taking oxygen from the water, cover the entire animal. In the case of this nudibranch, it's moving over a piece of green sea lettuce that's very good snail food. Because the gills are exposed, they're called naked-gilled animals, or nudibranchs. They come in all the colors of the rainbow, and some have spots like a leopard. And the most beautiful of all was Flavolina. The gills are iridescent in the sunlight. Flavolina is eating seaweed. But the villain of the snail world is Navinax enormus. Instead of eating algae or seaweed, he eats other snails. And he's descended upon beautiful Flavolina. And if this makes you unhappy, remember that in nature it is necessary somehow for one animal to eat another. Even we eat other animals. And ironically enough, all that is left of the nudibranch are the naked gills, which continue to move even though detached from the rest of the body, like a lizard's tail will continue to move when it is detached. Is it any wonder that these animals have had to find ways to protect themselves? And one of the best ways is to dig a hole and climb into it, and that is just what the ghost shrimp has done for thousands of years. Like other shrimps, he has 10 legs. One leg is highly developed for offense and defense, but 9 of them are used for digging. Ghost shrimp ordinarily never sees the light of day, and that accounts for its ghostly color. The ghost shrimp has a tenant in his burrow, the blind fish. As far as we know, the ghost shrimp gains nothing from the presence of the blind fish. But from the ghost shrimp, the blind fish gets food as well as the protection of the burrow. He is tolerated by the shrimp. A strange relationship in nature known as commensalism. The ghost shrimp uses the swimmer as to bring in food into the burrow, which is shared with a blind fish. If you look under enough rocks, you may find an octopus. So you say you aren't going to look under any rocks, but if you do, here is one, and notice how he squirts out water. That's his way of getting away. If you don't hold him, he changes color from dark to light, depending upon his mood, exactly like we do. This octopus has been left behind by the receding tide, and he's looking for a tide pool. Behind glass, we can see how the octopus does resemble the villain of a melodrama as he slinks from one place to another, which may account for his bad reputation. And when he leaves, wraps his cloak about him, and away he goes by jet propulsion. Out in the deeper water, we can find some close relatives of the octopus, the scallops, which are more abundant offshore. We don a scuba, which is known as a self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. There are many marvelous creatures out there beyond the shoreline, many that have survived, whereas on land they have been destroyed by people. So again, behind glass for a better look. The scallops, which you've seen on your menu, and scallops are quite animated. When you find shells on the beach, you probably don't think of them as being this active in the living state. The scallops have one large muscle by which they swim by jet propulsion, and it is the one that you eat when you eat scallops. The black dots are eyes. Scientists say scallops are very intelligent. They certainly have plenty of eyes to see what's going on. This marvelous world is open to all of us to visit, whether you have scuba equipment or not. Jack, I'd like to take you along on one of our little expeditions to the world between the tides. This is our home on an island in a harbor at Newport Beach, California. And off we go. We have not far to go, really. After all, we live along the seashore. Now, we try to find a place that civilization has not spoiled by collecting very few specimens. We have an aquarium. A lot of the animals we photographed at the seashore, but some of them we can take back and study and wait for action, which sometimes takes time. There, out beyond the point, lies this wonderful world that we have been talking about. This is one of our favorite hunting grounds. Most people haven't found it yet. The animals in the tidal zone here are protected by their isolation. The stingray has two means of protecting himself. One is to bury himself in the sand. Now watch this. Now you see him, now you don't. And unlike any other fish, he has openings in the top of his body through which he can breathe, even though buried. The second means of defense is a stinger. So when we lift him out of the sand, we're very careful to avoid that wicked stinger. And back he goes.
Wonderful camouflage.
He even snorted a little bit to show his disdain for us. Here's the stinger. I'm not going to touch it with my finger, and I'm not going to cut it. While the stingray has a barb on his tail for protection, the moray eel has sharp teeth. Again, behind glass, see how he resembles an eel in his motion. Yet he is really not an eel at all, but related to the higher fish, the bony fish. Now let's get away from the mainland of Southern California and go out to the Channel Islands. This is Wally Bassett, my brother-in-law, who went to Stanford with me back in the 30s. Ever since I've known Wally's been flying airplanes, which is very comforting when you fly out over the ocean. The Channel Islands are about a dozen in number. They're off the California coast, about 21 miles from the mainland. That's Anacapa and Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is the largest of the group. And this is the way the Southern California seashore looked to Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo in 1542. Cabrillo's career was cut short when he was tied up here at San Miguel Island, and he broke his arm and died. We fly along the world between the tides. The tide is high. Look at those rocks down there. They are teeming with life. We're landing on an inadequate landing field. We hoped we'd stop before we came to that end of the runway. It was here at Kyler Harbor that Cabrillo spent his last days. Buckets, always the buckets. Most people, when they go hunting, they'll take rifles. But, you know, I'll bet that we have more fun with them than most men do with their high-powered rifles. Down here on the rocky shore at Kyler Harbor, apparently man is not too much in evidence, and these animals are certainly protected by their long distance from the mainland. Let's investigate this pool. Sometimes the creatures are not readily visible. They hide under rocks. That's a kelp crab that's been washed in by a breaker. He'd be much happier out in the deep water. But there are crabs that spend their time along the rocky shores. A close relative of the Dungeness crab that's been made famous by the fact that it is so good to eat is this different species. The Dungeness crab is only found as far south as Monterey and up as far as Alaska. This is a Southern California relative of that Dungeness crab. It's also edible. For an animal with 5 pairs of legs, the crab is unusually well coordinated. For him, the first pair of legs are knives, forks, and spoons. He's eating blue point mussel on the half shell, and he's watching carefully to make sure that he misses not one tasty morsel. Unlike us, crabs have an external skeleton, and it is quite inconvenient to them. They must shed this skeleton, and when they do, they're the prey of their enemies. Man being no exception. They're known as soft-shell crab on the menu. And like so many animals that you've seen in this picture that have learned to escape their enemies by burying themselves, so does the crab bury himself when he's shed his skeleton, and eats every bit of his old skeleton, so that he will conserve all of the mineral matter that he is shearing off each little bit of that skeleton, so that he'll grow one just like it with the same high calcium concentration. Now this crab is an actor. He's decorating himself. He will make himself look like anything except a crab. He is in hopes that he will resemble a traveling kelp bed. And to show you how nature has cooperated in this fight for survival, this crab has little spines all over his external skeleton on which he will place pieces of algae. And he instinctively knows how to decorate himself. He knows he must cut the seaweed at right angles so that these stems will fit onto the spines. And the first time he places it there, it sticks. And there's little barbs to prevent it from being removed. Now, the clowns of the tide pool. The hermit crabs, instead of disguising themselves, they use the shell of a snail. And the snail shell is usually one that's big enough so that he can climb right in. It's a shield big enough for him to climb in. Now, I don't know why they call them hermit crabs. They're the most gregarious of all the animals we've ever observed. They play games, no holds barred, leapfrog. Junior has decided that the shell on the right is the smallest, and the one for him, the one on the left, is too big. You can see the appendage which he has been given by nature to hang on to his shell. He hasn't hung on to this one tight enough. The big bully has decided that that small shell is for him, but it's pinching him. And it pays him right, but it doesn't pay Junior right that the big bully is now pinching him. Junior was going to make the best of the big shell. He swings him around over his head and throws him as far as he can. And disdainfully kicks Junior's shell aside. But watch the big bully. He gets into more trouble than the off there in the background. In the meantime, Junior has discovered that this is a shell he wanted in the first place, and all's well that ends well. The tide is coming in. The animals sensing that soon they will feel the crashing force of the breakers, go down into the rocky crevices for protection. The sand dollar buries himself with his spines. And so the sea returns. Once more, the breakers shatter upon the shore, so that we wonder how anything could survive in the midst of its surging force. But we know that thousands and thousands of animals have learned to accept the waves, and that the world between the tides is their home. Man accepts the challenge of the world between the tides. He too has learned to adapt himself to the forces of breakers, so much so that he depends upon the sea. Man uses the sea for transportation. Man gets food from the sea. Man uses the sea for recreation. Our relationship is so close that our blood resembles seawater. The rain that sustains life comes from the sea. Maybe we came from life that once lived in the sea. All around the edge of the sea are millions of miles of the world between the tides, the coastlines of the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wakeman. I'm sure that our audience will agree with us that we weren't exaggerating a bit when we call this film the loveliest underwater film that we have ever seen. I'm only truly sorry, sir, that we had to condense it into a half hour for our program. Now, how long did it actually take you to capture on film all of the very fascinating segments that we saw tonight?
Altogether, it took about 6 years, Jack. We followed the seashore from Southern California to Puget Sound in Washington.
Of these different scenes that we saw, which one gave you the most enjoyment?
Well, I think the decorator crab is the real actor of our film.
Well, that's the one that was sticking all those little pieces of seaweed camouflage, wasn't that it? Uh-huh.
Unbelievable.
Has there been an awakening of interest in oceanography? Do you feel that people today are more interested perhaps in the sea than they were 10 or 20 years ago?
I certainly do, Jack. And I think that aquariums and oceanariums, such as Marineland here, are doing a great deal to increase that interest.
Mr. Wakeman, again, our very sincerest thanks for bringing to us what I think, and I hope that our audience will agree, is the most beautiful underwater film we have ever seen. Thank you very much, Mr. Norman Wakeman of Newport Beach, California.
Thank you, Jack.